Hello. I want to thank you for coming, and thank you in the TV audience, the webcast audience, those of you viewing this on YouTube. Thank you for coming to our Climate Matters TV shows we put on at the annual Conference of Parties. I'm your host, Stuart Scott. Here's my email address. I like to put it up at the beginning and at the end, so you'll have another chance to write it down. If you have any questions, comments about the show, if you'd like me to forward questions to our guest. Today's show is Climate Reality. We have with us Ken Berlin, who is the President and CEO, Chief Executive Officer of the Climate Reality Project. Now, the Climate Reality Project, I'm actually a member of the project. I joined when it was the Climate Project. They added reality. Why did they add reality, Ken? 24 words or less.
I think the reason is that we're really telling people this is the real world, because there's a counter-narrative that says climate change is not real. It is real. That's why we use the name Climate Reality Project.
It was strategic positioning, because I was there working with the organization when it went through that change. I think it's very strategic, because deniers are into a fantasy reality. Don't tell me. I don't want to know the truth. Now, the Climate Reality Project was founded by Al Gore, who I believe is the world's statesman. He and perhaps Pope Francis are the two world's statesmen on climate change, both of them saying equally strong messages. We owe him a lot. I owe him a lot. He gave me traction to do what I do. Now, it's not all dire situation. The Climate Reality Project likes to have fun. We're going to talk more about that. And there's the URL. I mean, it's easily found if you search it on the internet. And this may be useful for you because we'll discuss later the Climate Reality Leadership Core. Now, I want to ask Ken, before we get into our 24 hours of climate reality, a couple of questions. First, if you can explain what the project is, broad view.
The main goal of the Climate Reality Project is to build public support across all levels of society for addressing climate change. And you can see that this is a critical issue if you look at this election, because we still, in this election, did not have a single question in presidential debates about climate change. We need to have people saying that climate change is an important issue to them. It's an issue they vote on, and an issue that they want the press to cover. And our job is to create the activists who can ensure that that happens.
Now, Ken, it's almost impossible to avoid the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is the recent election in the United States. I'd like to ask you, and you can frame it as your personal opinion, but I'd like to ask you what you think about what a Trump presidency holds in store for us.
Well, I can't sugarcoat the implications of Trump. He really ran this campaign as a climate denier. He's talking to people who are climate deniers. We hope in the end, we don't know in the end really what he's going to do, but we are, of course, very worried that he will take a negative position on climate change. So the question is, what does that mean? We should all remember that in the United States, we have state governments, we have local governments, we have cities, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of businesses that want to take action on climate change. Our goal is to make sure that we see action on climate change over the next 4 years that enables us to meet our commitments that we made here in under the Paris Agreement. We think we can do that even if the federal government kind of pulls out of this. Then we'll come back in 2020, try and win the election and get us completely back on course again. But we think we can make enough progress to meet our commitments under Paris, and then in 2021 strengthen them. We do have to win the election in 2021 for that to happen.
I like to mention to people also, when the subject of Donald Trump comes up, that Al Gore offered to support the Trump presidency in terms of climate. He put out a hand, reached out a hand. If you're going to be a president for all Americans, he said, here, I'm willing to lend my hand to you. So let's move from the United States to the bigger picture, the global picture. The dangers of climate change are often dismissed, both in the public narrative and in politics. So what steps do citizens, organizers, and decision makers need to cross the threshold and create the critical mass that'll lead to the political will we talk about that we so need?
Well, again, it sort of differs to some degree in every country, but outside the United States, we don't have the kind of political denial that you have in the United States. But there still is tremendous inertia. There's opposition from business interests. There are reasons, they say, why we can't do the quick transition to renewable energy that we really need to do now. So what citizens need to do is really, again, go out, organize, get involved, work with Climate Reality Project. We have branch offices in 10 key countries around the world. We don't have an office. Work with another group there. We need people working on this. Leaders in every country need your support. They need to know people want action. The only thing holding back action is the sense that political leaders get that people don't treat this as an urgent problem that has to be solved now. We need to make sure that they understand that people want action on this.
Going back to the U.S. For a moment again, how is Climate Reality, the Climate Reality Project, working to push for action on climate change and make it a leading issue in the United States?
Well, again, we do it in two ways. One is we train, as you've heard, climate reality leaders. We have about 10,000 trained around the world, and we train them to speak about climate change. So one way we build up activists is they go out and speak. They did 2,500 speaking events last year to about 200,000 people, and we want to expand that. We also train people to speak to their peers in what we call the Climate Speakers Network. We did 46 trainings in the last 2 years in the African American community, Hispanic community, faith-based community, and the business community, to have the people in those communities go out and speak to their members, to their peers, to their communities. So one thing we do is we speak, but we also have a lot of programs designed to help bring about this transition. We have two programs in which we're pushing cities to go 100% renewable. We have a program in the ski community, and we have a program on college campuses. We started the college campus program last year. We now have 21 essentially chapters on campuses. We want to go to 50 to 100 campuses in the next year, working on this transition to renewable energy. And of course, now that we have a Trump presidency, if he comes out negative, we have to sit back now and think again about what we want to do in this context. The whole environmental community is having meetings about that, and we will continue those meetings to figure out the way we can be most effective in this new administration. But we will not let up, and we will work twice as hard to make sure that we get action despite the Trump administration.
So, okay, I'd like to know if you can, again, give us the big picture. What are the indications that you've seen, if any, suggesting that the conversation is changing, that we are turning the corner?
Well, we think we're turning the corner and getting really towards the critical mass of support we need, really for three different reasons. One is, and it's important, is the economics of this issue are changing fundamentally. Renewable energy is now really cost competitive in most places with fossil fuel-based energy, and if it's not cost competitive, it will be in the very near future. Electric cars are becoming cheaper. They'll be cost competitive in the next few years. So for the first time, we can do this transition in a way, and I think in a way that will lead to cheaper, cleaner, and more reliable energy that benefits the economy, creates jobs, and makes the country more competitive. When we have that message, that's obviously a very, very strong message. Yes. The second reason is we do see public support building. The latest polls show that about 70% of Americans want action on climate change. I think in the last 2 years, we had a 19% increase in Republicans in the polls who say they want action on climate change. So we are getting that. Again, our problem is we don't have activists, but we have the support there. We just have to activate it. And the third reason is, of course, is Mother Nature is relentless. She is not going to give us a moment's respite if we don't address climate change. The situation is getting worse and worse, and it gets harder and harder for people to ignore what's really happening in the real world. So we think the conditions are there, the economics are there, the public support is there, and the evidence of climate change is there to make what we're happening inevitable, and the change inevitable. The only question has always been, can we do it fast enough? And that's what we all have to work hard to make sure we can do this transition quickly enough.
Good. Thank you. I think that gave us a good idea. I'll have to say that the hope quotient that I have is because of groups like Climate Reality Project.
Thank you.
I encourage people to get involved. I'll show the URL again. And if you're not in one of these areas, they were all in North America, but you want to be trained in your part of the world, then you can write to the Climate Reality Project.
Trainings, by the way, are free. You've got to get there, but the trainings are free.
Yeah, and they're wonderful. They're wonderful. So I'd like to move on to the 24 hours of climate reality, if I may. Now, it's a 24-hour, around-the-world, tag team relay race TV program.
Well, it's a webcast and TV program. Both.
Yes, okay. And Al Gore does appear at every one of these programs and will be again this year.
He really does an amazing job. He will give an 8 or 10-minute PowerPoint at the start of each of the 24 hours for 24 hours straight, every PowerPoint different. It's really quite a command performance and worth watching, at least a little bit of it.
Yeah, he's a bundle of energy. And the entertainment that's part of the 24 hours of climate reality is quite good. So I encourage you all to watch. Just you don't have to sit there and watch for 24 hours. Just tune in for a while. So let's take a look at the trailer. To me, it looks like it's going to be a great event this year, and I'll be watching. I'll be watching from Italy, but I'll be watching. And I hope a lot of you people will as well. I'd like to go back to the idea of the Climate Reality Leadership Corps, because I think it's going to take a lot more leaders to help push those who are supposed to be our leaders to do the right thing.
Yes, and the Climate Reality Leadership Corps is a group of people who have been trained, obviously, in our trainings. As I said, the trainings last 3 days. Al Gore speaks for 8 hours, and he really speaks and teaches people how to give a slideshow about climate. We also train people in organizing. We train them in, depending on the country we're in, we train them on facts relevant to what they're doing. We might train them on media. Every one of these is different. We then have a website, we call it the Climate Reality Hub, where everyone can come together and interact with each other.
A social network.
Right, it's on a social media website. And again, we have our climate reality leaders. Then our goal is to then activate our climate reality leaders, get them involved in different things. Speaking is one thing, but various campaigns we do, we also try and work with our climate reality leaders. So I think it's a very powerful tool, creating leaders. And now we've added to that, as I said, the Climate Speakers Network, where we're training people also. So we're training probably between 1,500 and 2,000 people to be climate reality leaders a year, and 2,000 or 3,000 people to be climate speakers a year. So we're rapidly expanding what we're doing, and we have very strong climate reality leaders all over now. Christiana Figueres, who headed the UNFCCC going into Paris, is a trained climate reality leader, for example.
I have to tell a little anecdote. The first COP that I went to was COP 14 in Poznan, Poland. And you'll forgive me, I picked email addresses off of the website. Now the email addresses are hidden, but I have a social network to contact people. But I picked them off the website, and afterwards I was told not to do that. And I wrote to everybody that I could get. And the first response I got was from a woman by the name of Christiana Figueres. And she said, "Here's my number, contact me when you get here." I said, "How is it that you're there so soon? I mean, it's not for another week." She said, "I'm the lead negotiator for Costa Rica." So she became my window into what was going on behind the scenes. So yes, she is one of the early members of the Climate Reality Leadership Corps. Now, let's go back to the socio-politico-economico picture, okay? And we'll go back to Trump for a starter, because he is a very significant event on the horizon. Now, he's made it clear through his campaign that he's intending to push for more coal use, more coal extraction. How do you plan to oppose that?
Well, first of all, on more coal use, the United States has not built a new coal plant for several years, and the economics are incredibly unfavorable for that. I think his promise of building new coal plants is going to go absolutely nowhere. That I don't think he'd be able to get financing from any institution to do that. So I think that's an empty promise.
So he was blowing smoke, essentially.
Yeah. Now, he may try and increase exports. There are things he can do that we have to fight. Most export terminals have been stopped at the state level, so we can still continue to do that here. And of course, it's, the hard question now is how do we close down existing coal plants? This could, one response to Trump could be to try and extend the life of some of those. But and that's where the environmental community, again, has to reach out, and, Sierra Club's leading the effort on closing down coal plants, and where there can be on-the-ground action, we can try and be involved in that.
No, probably in your position you can't espouse it, but I can. I think it's going to take a lot of civil disobedience from the citizens of many nations, especially the United States, to help with that. Now, we know that coal is not the whole situation, and we can't just sit back and let the markets work in terms of renewables replacing fossil fuels. So how come coal is still profitable or being used throughout the world in so many places?
Well, first of all, the United States is not profitable. A lot of coal companies have gone bankrupt recently, and they're coming out of it again, and they'll try and start doing it again. Coal is really, in the United States, easily undersold by natural gas and now renewable energy. Existing coal plants, though, are a different story. It's not so easy to close down an existing coal plant. Just because you have another source of energy that's competitive with or even cheaper doesn't mean you close down an existing plant. That's why the Clean Power Plan that President Obama proposed was so important, because it dealt with existing plants to close them down. And, a lot of these plants are old, and a lot of companies are thinking about closing them down. Ultimately, things like a carbon tax would make a big difference, or regulations. We need that to close down coal plants. In other parts of the world that don't have a lot of natural gas, it can be harder. But one thing to keep in mind is that there's been a lot of science denial in the United States, and a lot of the world is economic denial. There are people denying the fact that renewable energy is cost competitive. And that denial is going to exist for many years after the economics change. And that's one thing we have to fight. And that's one thing as an organization we do. We go out and talk about the economics and explain that renewable energy is fully cost competitive. It's suffered a little bit still because of the storage issue, getting the energy stored. But again, with batteries, we're getting very close to being able to make renewable energy fully cost competitive. So I think the economic situation is very, very strong. And, where economics are strong, our task becomes far, far easier in doing that, in really accomplishing what we're trying to accomplish. Also in the United States, we have regulations requiring removal of toxic pollutants from gas that comes out of a coal plant. That's also a very powerful force closing down coal plants, because when a company looks at that, they've got to decide whether to put on very, very, very expensive scrubbers or close the coal plant down and replace it with renewable energy. In some places, they're still doing natural gas renewables. But last year, in the United States, 75% of all new energy generation was renewable energy. So we are making very good progress on that.
Okay, so let's move beyond the United States again. What messages are most effective in different parts of the world?
I think everywhere in the world, we really have to establish a couple of things in order for us to be successful in doing this transaction. The first is that it's urgent, as I said. We have to take action now. We can't wait 5 or 10 years. We know that everybody's worried about a lot of things, but climate change is an existential threat. You have to pay attention to it. That message alone is not enough, though. The message that resonates the most once people pay attention and is really critical is that there are solutions to this. We can, in fact, replace coal plants. We can say we can do that economically now. And it's very important for people to understand that, because very few people really understand that we can do that successfully.
So how are we going to motivate the troops? How are we going to motivate citizen action?
How are we going to catalyze some of the audience watching this?
I think in the United States, if Trump does what he says he's going to do, that will catalyze action. People will realize they can't sit there complacently because he's going to go after this in a way. If he follows up with what he says in the campaign in a way that will be very, very obvious, and I think will make people realize they have to do something about this right now. But again, we all have to reach out. We try and do it by social media. We try and do it by individuals. The entire environmental community is trying to do it. And, you know, we're reaching a lot of people, but we're not fully succeeding yet. I don't know the numbers yet, but I'll bet the millennial vote in this election was probably 10 points below any other age cohort, the percentage who voted. That is a fundamental problem. If it had been the same, we might have won this election. So we got to figure out a way to do that, and people have to reach out to their friends, their colleagues. They've got to get involved, and they've got to do things, and we will try and help you do that and help you organize that if you become involved with our organization.
Yes, it's a good social group to belong to, so I encourage, again, the audience to get involved. Now, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. I mean, as a climate activist, as an ecologist, I constantly have to pick myself up in the morning and say, the way I'm going to get through this day is by working on it, by working on the problem. So why do you think that we'll succeed? What are your reasons for optimism?
Well, I think we'll succeed for the reasons I said earlier, that you know, this is an existential threat to people, and when people recognize that and recognize there are solutions to it, I think we'll be able to succeed. But I think it's very important for people to understand that they are actually empowered. We need every individual who acts has power on us. The power is shown by having thousands and then hundreds of thousands and millions of people acting, but everyone is empowered to bring about results. If you work at this, we will get the results we want. And it's the feeling, if people feel they don't have the power and sit back and don't do anything, they don't vote, they don't do anything, then in fact, we lose. If people feel empowered, which they really are, if they get involved, then we will in fact be successful in addressing this.
I'm going to give you one final open-ended closing shot. What personal experience do you want to add to what you've said this evening?
Well, you know, my personal experience really on this is that, you know, I'm old enough to know that we never win the final battle on this. We have to keep working all the time. This is a setback, but we will overcome the setback. We've had very difficult periods in the United States before where the country's been very, very divided. In the 60s, for example, when we had, you know, major assassinations and major race riots. We can overcome this. It's not easy, and we have to work together to do it, but I think we can succeed. And, you know, 4 years when you get older is not as long as you think when you're young. We will get through these 4 years, and then we'll, you know, begin to move forward very quickly again.
Okay. I want to thank you, Ken, for joining me in this half hour. This is Climate Matters TV, and I'm your host, Stuart Scott. There's my email address again, as I promised. And I welcome comments and questions, and I can forward them to Ken. And we've come to you from COP22 in Marrakesh, Morocco. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for watching.
Thank you very much.